On a une conférencière aujourd'hui qui va nous présenter un peu les travaux de Dublin. Mais Jennifer, vous savez, c'est une personne assez particulière parce qu'elle arrive dans le monde du UX, mais à partir du monde de la psychologie. Donc, diplômée, doctorante en psychologie humaine, c'est une personne qui a donc le pouvoir magique de lire dans les pensées des gens et d'utiliser ce pouvoir-là dans le monde de l'expérience utilisateur. Jennifer, on l'applaudit bien fort, mesdames et messieurs.
Thank you. So apart from some really delicious Thanksgiving side dishes, does anybody know what these three things are together? No, yeah, the Three Sisters, I just heard that. So the Three Sisters are an indigenous way of doing agriculture in which three plants are planted together to get the most benefits to all of them. We have the squash that has big leaves that shades the soil and makes it really rich. We have the green beans, which provide a lot of microorganisms to the soil. We have the corn that grows really, really high, and it provides a scaffolding for the beans to wrap around. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is really coming back from some of the great talks we saw this morning about cognitive biases and behavioral science, about qualitative research methods, about data, and really the kinship that comes between them, that in a way there are the three sisters. And like siblings, they fight. Yes, sometimes it's not always harmonious, but overall they work better when they're working together. So the difference, of course, between the monoculture in which, you know, it's just fine, there's nothing wrong with it, but you're going to get a better result when you work together. So a couple of things that I am not, before I tell you things that I am. I'm not an agriculturalist, so if I got some of these details wrong, I'm really sorry. Please don't tweet about it. Je suis née à Montréal. On voit que je parle assez bien le français. J'ai un petit accent beaconsfieldaise que vous pouvez peut-être entendre. But it's been a long time since I've lived here, so I hope you don't mind. I'm going to speak in English just because it's a little bit easier for myself, but I am a Habs fan. I'm also not a UX designer or specifically a UX researcher, but almost all of the work that I do in Dublin has a connection to the UX world. It almost always goes to UX designers. I'm almost always talking to UX designers. So there's this incredible ability for us to work together. So I'm going to come at this from my perspective, which is actually from like a really, really weird background. So I started off as a clinical psychologist. I got my PhD in clinical psychology from Queen's University, and I was working in the field of autism and intellectual disabilities. I moved back to Montreal to do a teaching job at Concordia. Worked there for a small amount of time. Also worked at the Centre de Réadaptation à Québec. Really doing clinical practice work. I was getting a little bit bored. I didn't know what I was doing. It felt a little bit, you know, once I'd kind of reached that level of expertise and was doing the same thing every day, I started to get a little bored, so I started moonlighting as a fashion and lifestyle and beauty writer. So I actually started an online web magazine with the Montreal Gazette, where I chronicled life in Montreal and talked a lot about going out to dinner and the fashion that is in Montreal, so gained a great appreciation for all things. I also started my own social media marketing content company for a little while, ran that for a few years, and then kind of moonwalked out of that when it became less about content and a lot more about development. I didn't find myself as useful. And then after that, I thought, like, what am I going to do? I've got all these weird skill sets. I'm a psychologist. I'm interested in people. I love content. I love marketing. I love building businesses. That had been my favorite part of starting my own business, was building it. And then all of a sudden, I had to run it every day. And I thought, oh, gosh. And so my husband, who actually was a professor at Université de Montréal, got a job offer at University of Toronto, and I said, I'll move, but I want to do an MBA, and I want to find out what else is out there. And when I was there, I met the wonderful people at BE Works, which is a behavioral economics consulting firm that is co-owned by Dan Ariely. It's in Toronto. And I got to work there for a little while, and I also became passionate about human-centered design and felt that sort of tension between the two of them. And thought that was really interesting. So now I'm at Deloitte. I also have a little girl. She's 19 months old. That's her costume. She's dressed as a pineapple for soccer. And so all this to say, although, you know, I'm not an agriculturalist, I'm not French, I'm not a UX designer, I'm very tired, I think, is really the point of all this. I'm exhausted. I'm going to get on the plane and fall asleep. But I am going to talk today about merging human behavior with the art of human-centered design. And being not a UX designer, I really hope you'll give me a lot of love and forgiveness for my slide design, which is not always amazing. What can you do? Can't be everything. So I'm just going to ask a question. Which country do you guys think is most generous? Do you think it is Sweden or Denmark? If you're a Sweden person, put your hands up. Who thinks the Swedes like to give? Who think the Danes? The Danes are the most generous. I feel like maybe you guys have heard this one before. In fact, it's actually the Swedes. Swedes are more generous when it comes to organ donation. About 86% of Swedes have signed up to donate their organs. 4.25% of Danes have signed up to donate their organs. I have a Danish friend, he gets mad at this, and is very loud about it, as Danes sometimes are. All right, if you know why, I'm going to ask you to sit on your hands. But if you don't know the reason behind this, can anybody make a guess as to why you think this is? Yes? Opt-out versus opt-in. See, people are getting really good at this. Yeah, it's literally like, this is a really big decision, right? It's like, am I going to give up my organs when I die? And the thing that like makes the difference between whether you choose to is this action. And why that happens is this. Where do you figure out, where do you make that decision? At the driver's license bureau, right? You're in a long line, you get up to the front, you're getting your driver's license, and they're like, do you want to give up your organs when you die? And you're like, shit, like, have I done all that I want to do in my life? If I die, like, what do my parents think of this? What am I going to think of this? Like, where will my organs go? And so at that very time-constrained moment, with a very fraught decision that you're faced with, you're going to do the easiest thing, which is to leave that check mark wherever it is, because that's probably the right answer. So countries where have gone from opt-out to opt-in have actually found that they increase the number of organ donations. So when you have to actually opt out, most people are likely to stay in. When you have to actually opt in, people are most likely to stay out. This is a great example. This is from the book Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely, which is a really fabulous book. He was looking in The Economist and he saw this. He saw, 1 year web subscription is $59, 1 year print subscription is $125. And if you put them both together, it is exactly the same cost as the print subscription. And he thought that was a weird display of choices. And he made an experiment, which is the way that scientists deal with things. Went out and asked people what they would do. 16% took the web, 84% took the print and web. And then he switched it up. He took it out, and he said, what's going to happen? And basically what happened is it reversed. So once you took out that middle option, it completely switched. And what's the problem here is that, what is a web subscription worth? For any of you guys, I was the digital content manager for Urban Expressions, which was an online lifestyle magazine for the Gazette, and people really don't know. They think that it's worth more if you can hold it, if you can touch it. If it's online, like, it's just in the air, right? Like, who knows where that lives? So people don't know. So adding this provided an anchor. It provided an anchor point to enable people to understand the value of something. Another great example of this is when bread makers were introduced. In Williams-Sonoma, they had a regular old bread maker. Nobody bought it. People were like, I don't know, bread comes in packages. Like, do I need to make bread? And then what they did was they introduced like this really high-end model with like silver knobs and like a glowing unicorn on the top and rainbows. It was just beautiful, and it was ridiculously expensive. And as soon as they put that in, people said, oh, okay, I'm going to buy the cheaper version. Because it gave them an anchor, it gave them a reference point. We have a hard time making decisions. So I'm going to talk a little bit to start about behavioral economics. And we have a hard time making decisions for a few big reasons. First of all, there's not a lot of time. Decisions have a lot of factors. We're pretty smart people, but we can't always do the math, and we don't always know all the information. And sometimes decisions can be really complex. They can actually have a lot of requirements to analyze. And so what happens is we become satisficers, which is like this blah word that suggests that we use these sort of shortcuts to get us where we need to be. And using shortcuts is actually really, really evolutionarily advantageous. So people who can make quick patterns in their mind and make decisions, they're more likely to live. Like imagine you're in the jungle, you're standing there, the leaves are moving, and you look over and you think, don't know, there could be the wind, or maybe it could be a tiger. Could it be a friend bringing me a snack? Who knows? What is the wind really? That person, if that's a tiger, they are dead. That's it. But the guy who says, leaves are moving, I'm out, I'll find out later what it was, that person who sees that pattern and reacts really quickly survives. So we have evolved over generations and generations to become really good at seeing patterns. And sometimes what happens is, by looking for patterns, we make mistakes. And what happens sometimes in UX is that we develop and we give people patterns so that they do make mistakes, and those are called dark patterns. We'll talk a bit about those. And so, the field of behavioral economics is really about a scientific exploration of understanding how we can take these mistakes that people make in a predictable way and use them to nudge people into better behavior. So a great example of that is, how do you get school children to eat more vegetables? They tried everything. They made vegetables really cheap and candy really expensive. They gave reward systems. You got stars. They did a lot of different things that they thought would work. Ultimately, the best thing, put it at eye level. If they can see it, they'll take it. Simple, nice, low-cost intervention that worked really, really well. And so, again, as I say, people are irrational, but they're doing it in a predictable way. So we can actually take advantage of that for people's better interest. We know that we dislike losing more than we like to win. So we hate losing. This is called prospect theory. It's actually really important if you're a sports bettor. So just so you know, just before halftime, the team that is losing very slightly is more likely to win the game. Statistically proven. So that's how you should bet. You actually see that swimmers will swim faster toward the finish line than they do away from the finish line. We have other ones like we remember high, low, and endpoints more than the whole experience. So one time I was hired to go into a hospital and help them improve their emergency room patient experience. And it was really hard to sort of do because people really don't like going to the emergency room, and there's not a lot of ways to make it better. And people were really saying, I like the care that I received. I thought that was really valuable. And all of these different things, but observing them, what we saw was that at the end of their care, they would be given their clothes and they would be told, okay, good luck. And they would make this really cold walk. We kept seeing people walking to the door like, oh, I'm just gone through this harrowing experience and now I've got to find my way home in the dark. And so what we said to them was, how about you make your endpoint a little bit warmer? How about you give people a walk to the door? How about you help them find their transportation home? How about you provide them with their instructions in a beautiful card that says, get well soon, to enable them to have that endpoint? So, you're already doing a good job, actually, of helping them in their time of need, but let's make them remember it a little bit better as something where they really did feel cared for until the last moment. So lots of ways to kind of work with this information. So here's another few great nudges that you guys may have seen around. How do you get people to recycle? There's two nudges in this picture. Can you identify them both? So we've got landfill. I mean, who wants to put their thing in there? That's clearly you're a bad person. And we've also got the bigger hole in recycling. So that, landfill, you're like, I can't even get it in. So you go to recycling. It's better. It's very clear. Reduce pedestrian accidents. How do we reduce them? Well, we put the signs where people are actually looking, which is down. If you've ever been to London, you've seen these. This is one of my favorites. How do you get people to throw cigarette butts on the ground? You give them a decoy choice. So you give them, so you vote. Isn't that great? I love this one. And people don't realize they can still, there's freedom is still there. They can still throw their cigarette on the ground if that's what they choose. But this just makes it easier to do the right thing. But it also brings up sort of one of the challenges that I see in behavioral research is that quite often we focus very much on what's needed right at that very, very moment, right? We want people to put their cigarette butts in there. We don't necessarily care if they quit smoking. That's not a problem. Or if they change their beliefs substantially in how they should deal with litter and cigarette butts. We just want them right there. How can we make it just easy for you? How do you get people to take the stairs instead of the escalator? You make it more fun. This was shown to work really, really well. People loved running up these stairs. It doesn't make them sporty. It doesn't make them care for physical activity. It's really, really just about that. Are there bad nudges? Yeah, there sure are. We talked a little bit about dark patterns, so that's using the science of human behavior to make people do things they don't want to do and that are really not good for them. I had a great one recently. I was buying my daughter a Halloween costume, and I wanted to get her an Elmo costume. She watches TV. She's 19 months. She loves Elmo. We decided against it eventually because I thought if she loves Elmo and then she looks in the mirror and she's like, but I am Elmo. Like, we worried that her head would explode and it would just be too much for her to do, or I'm being eaten by Elmo. I don't. So I didn't get her, but then here, look at this, only one left in stock. Really, it's Halloween, you only got one left in stock? Like, that seems unlikely. But it made me anxious. Another great one was I was at a restaurant, and you know how you get the tip that comes to you and then you have a default tip, right? Makes life easier. That default tip was set at 25%. And you felt like such a jerk, like scrolling down, being like, no, 2018. So yeah, you know what? I gave them 25%. I fell for it. And I walked out of that restaurant and I said, that was good food. I'm never going back there again. I don't like how they treated me. I don't like how they fooled me. I will never return again. It's a bad nudge. You got what you wanted, but you didn't get the long-term goal. What about if they don't really work? So here's a project that we did for a bank. They were creating an efficient and effective digital mortgage renewal experience. So anybody ever gotten or renewed a mortgage before? Yeah? Like, what's annoying about it? The whole thing, yeah. It's a pain in the ass. What else? Anything? Anybody want to talk about some other things that they found? It's hard. Feeling that you didn't get the best rate, exactly, yeah. I mean, so the goal of this, when I came into this project, and it was this really short sprint. It was one of my first projects, and they were like, in 3 weeks, figure this out. I was like, okay. They said, you know, we heard from everybody that we want it to be easy. And we want it to be really, really simple. We want to give them a quick way to decide. Nobody wants to be doing this mortgage renewal for that long. People just want to get this email and move on. And in fact, when we asked people directly, we did a bunch of interviews, and they said, yeah, I just want it to be easy. That's really just like, oh, make it easy. And make it easy is like the prime directive of behavioral economics, right? Like, it is the nudge that is most often used. How do we just make this easy? Like, let's make it really, really simple. So we showed them some great, just really simple prototypes, tested it out. Oh, you know, what would you do if you saw this in an email? And people were like, mm-mm. We use defaults and decoys to show them the best answer, right? Mm-mm, no thank you. Because ultimately, here's the problem. People didn't want it to be easy. When it was easy, it didn't feel great. We're going to talk a little bit more about how using human-centered design elucidated this a little bit. But first, I want to talk about some of the challenges of behavioral economics. I love it. I spent a long time studying psychology. But when we use behavioral economics, we base it on the scientific method. And that's really key. It's not just about sort of slapping nudges on because you've heard the default works best. It's about really following a method to understand. So what is the scientific method? You ask a question, right? You do your research. You go to the library. A lot of people miss this step. This is a really good step that you probably have forgotten. And maybe you haven't. I don't want to be insulting. But a lot of people have. And certainly where I work at Deloitte, when I say, oh no, we have to read the scientific literature, people are like, there's not enough time. And I'm like, well, there's not enough time to not do it, because then we're going to get it wrong. Because there's a lot of research out there. You can find out a lot of stuff because people have been finding it out. So instead of starting from the bottom and trying to learn knowledge like nobody has ever learned knowledge before, go to the library and see what's known and then work and start from there and build up. Propose a hypothesis. Well, I've read all this stuff. Here's what I think is going to be. Conduct an experiment. So if you're a strict behavioral economist, and this is how it works at BE Works, which really, really follows the scientific method to a T. You have all these hypotheses that are based on research. You create an experiment in which there are multiple quadrants that people can be in. You can have different, I'm forgetting the science word for it, but groups. And then you analyze your results. You get the data in. There's a clear causality. And when I've been to behavioral economics conferences before, I love this because you'll see people saying, like, we tried these 5 nudges. We used loss aversion, we used defaults, we used decoys, we used this, and the thing that worked was defaults. And you're like, why? And they're like, like, it's what worked, right? That's what worked. And then you publish your paper, of course, in a peer-reviewed journal, and you confidently suggest that there's causality there, which you can do. But then you include this really long list of limitations. Ever read a psych journal? They have this thing at the end that says limitations, and they're like, this was only studied on people who can dance. It may not work when it's raining. There's so many, and in fact, behavioral economics and psychology in general has a real problem of generalization and replication, right? The towel study, how many of you guys have heard that? 70% of people who stayed in this room who looked just like you and also have the same socks reuse their towels, and then you're more likely to do it, right? So we know that social proof is really useful. It doesn't work in Germany. Ha! What? They tried this study in Germany, totally didn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because people in Germany already do it. So it doesn't add anything new to them. It doesn't provide any new information. You have to actually understand what people believe. So let's talk about human-centered design. Design thinking is about putting the human at the center of the process. So instead of coming up with a business problem, solving it, and selling it to the user, which then involves like a lot of advertising, and a lot of instruction booklets and a lot of YouTube videos on how to do it, it's about like really understanding the business problem and the user problem from the beginning, and then designing something that's going to meet the user's needs. It's about creating balanced breakthroughs. So starting with the desirability, what humans want, understanding that in relation to viability from a business perspective and feasibility from a capability perspective, right? It's got to be something that earns money or breaks even, depending on whether you're a nonprofit or a profitable business, and it's got to be something that you can actually do. You have the capabilities, or you could easily build them. But it has to be desirable from a user perspective. And so I'm going to go through this quickly because I think Mina already did a great job, but we really want to talk to people. We want to go beyond behaviors. We want to understand beliefs. We want to understand context. And as a clinical psychologist, this is really sort of like what my work used to be. It was taking, how do I take the body of science on depression and deal with that to help the person who's sitting right in front of me? Because there's a ton of different treatments out there, but they've got a very unique experience, and I can't just be like, well, here's a guidebook, goodbye. These are the things that depressed people should do to make them better. I have to know their experience. And so when we actually talked to these mortgage renewers, what did we find out? We found out that the first time they got their mortgage, they were screwed. They had a friend who got a better rate. They were told that they could only do one. They only had one bank accept them, so they had to go with whatever. And in those 5 years in between their first mortgage and their mortgage renewal, they'd done a bunch of things. They learned about mortgages. They knew so much more about them. They paid every month, and goddammit, they wanted to be rewarded for that. They'd gotten a couple of promotions, so they actually had more money. They got married and had a family. Like, all of these things had happened to them. And at that moment, at that renewal, they wanted a seat at the table because they were not going to get screwed again. And so make it easy? Too easy. They said they wanted it easy. They didn't. They needed respect. And respect came from a bit of a weight in the process. So we talked about how do we add respectful weight into this process? Because nudges don't always work, but human-centered design can also go wrong. Anybody know what this is? So this is the Homer. Homer Simpson was invited by his half-brother, who owned a big car company, to design a car for the average American. He said, I trust you. You know what the average American wants. And he ended up building an $84,000 car because he wanted separate bubbles for the kids. He wanted a big horn on top. He wanted a guy bowling on the front. Like, you have to remember that asking just one person or asking just a few people and trying to generalize, I think, both of these methods have these drawbacks, but together they're pretty amazing. So, if we've got behavioral economics, which is grounded in scientific evidence and is about testing and is about following methodology, you have human-centered design, which is about really truly understanding humans, empathizing with them, and being holistic. Together we do behavioral design, and that's something that I like to do at Dublin. And this is a great article that you guys should definitely take note of, A New Model for Integrating Behavioral Science and Design by Sarah Reed and Ruth Schmidt. Both were ex-Dubliners when they wrote this. Sarah has come back, thank goodness. But it's really about sort of like, taking this framework of where to play and how to win and expanding it to kind of how we're going to use and integrate behavioral economics and human-centered design, and separating it into two aspects. So you can have behavioral science-led, informed by design insights, and design-led, informed by behavioral insights. So I feel like I have to go through these quickly. Don't worry, there's no way I'm going to read this. But this is how we think about it in Deloitte, because we have so many different groups that can contribute to this process. And so we have a 6-step process, because who doesn't? Raise your hand if you don't have a 6-step process. But defining outcomes, then diagnosing the barriers, identifying interventions, design interventions, test interventions, analyze results, and scale up. And we've got our Omnia AI team that comes in at parts of this. We've got Dublin that can come in at parts of this. If the project is in human capital, we've got our human capital that can come in at part of this. We've got everybody who can really play a role in doing parts of these as a menu. So depending on what problem you have, you can actually find the right people to help you answer it. So a couple of ways in which I've used this. I had to create a digital tool to enable learners facing systemic disadvantages to access post-secondary education. So the client wanted a tool. They wanted an information tool. And what happened when we talked to users? When you face systemic disadvantages, you suffer from what's known as cognitive depletion. Being poor makes you really tired. It makes you less able to deal with complex problems like finding a university. And especially when you haven't done well in university before, that can be really daunting. And so what we ended up saying was, well, it needs to be about connecting people, because the people who had been successful have been people who had found somebody to help them. And that was really the key for them. And we also knew that we wanted to take, I'm sorry, I'm going to go just a very small amount over time, but we wanted to take this idea about feeling excluded from the education system. And what we asked ourselves was, how then do we create a default to enable people to feel like they belong in the post-secondary education system, even if they haven't experienced that. And for all of you guys, you might think, like, how do we default somebody into going to university? You can't just be like, well, you're going to McGill unless you say no. But how many people really thought they had a choice? I didn't. I knew I was going to university. It was always a default in my mind. So there's been a couple of really great precursors that exist out there. San Francisco seeds kindergartners' account with $50 to save for college education. That's been shown to be effective in they're already saving. They're already on the path as early as kindergarten. There's a high school in the States that will make you get an acceptance to university in order to graduate from high school. You don't have to go, but you have to get accepted. And they dramatically increased the rates of students who both graduated and went to post-secondary education because they defaulted them in. So our question that we ended with and we gave to the UX designers at the end was how can you create an online portal in which every choice the person makes has an assumption that they are good enough to be in post-secondary education? That it is not something that they have to try for or work hard for or give up for, but that's something that they can do. I wanted to give another example, but I don't have time. So I just wanted to give you some key takeaways. Caveat, came up with these last night after we all went out for dinner, and I had about 2 glasses of wine, so we're going to see how much sense they make. There is no one method that's magic. Behavioral economics is not magic. Human-centered design is not magic. Neuroscience testing is not magic. None of them do all the things. You have to know what's good about it and what's not good about it and know who else to participate with. If you have causality but you don't have context, you just have prescription. Like your doctor told you to take a pill, it's going to cure something, you don't know why, right? But if you have context without causality, that's just description. So together, that helps us really understand something. Labs are fabulous and remote, like randomized control trials for reducing noise, but life is really noisy, and if you're actually talking about real life, you might just want to listen to some noise and get comfy with some noise. Noise is okay. Mix up your teams, make new friends, break things. Don't hang out only with people who do the same things you do. Get together with other people, explain what you do to them, ask them what they do. Find ways to make that work together. And ultimately, when you're working in a job that I am, your clients just want an answer that they can use. They don't care if your rigor has been perfect. They don't care if this is a publishable article. They want to be able to do something that's useful for their customers, for their users, for their citizens. And so those are my key takeaways. So thank you very much for your time.
All right. Jennifer Nachshen.
Thank you. Good, I'm glad.
Hey, Jennifer. Alors, tout le monde en a des questions. We have few questions. So, sli.do, sli.do, UXC19, vos questions. Mais, hey, Jennifer, tu nous dis, well, there's no magic. You don't need to use all that. But it looks like magic. It looks amazing, this ability to understand humans' behavior and the behavior elements that drive response and how the responses are. At the same time, we've seen, and Manuel showed us, like there's like a gazillion number of biases and elements related to human behaviors that drives the response. Is there a systematic way for us designers, for us business leaders, to have at least the 80-20 ways to systematically integrate those into our work?
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly there's a lot of groups that build shortcuts. I don't think I have it in this slide deck, but you know, at Doblin we have a behavioral design toolkit that we use very often, which divides some of the common problems that we see into kind of categories. And there's 13 big challenges in 4 big categories with tactics that are associated to them. So it certainly is possible to lighten the load if need be and to use some of these kinds of toolkits. And I'm very, very happy to talk about our Doblin toolkit. I don't know how much I can share it quickly, but because it's our IP, but the ways that you can do this. And I think that, you know, magic always looks like magic when there's a lot of work behind it. So read as much as...
That. Magic is...
Magic looks like magic, but no, there's always a lot of work behind it, right? So when you see people dancing beautifully and it makes it look so easy, it's because they've done their work. So I recommend reading, just, you know, learning. There are ways to take online courses in behavioral economics that are great. You can read Predictably Irrational. It'll give you some nuggets to work with. And you know, when people come to me all the time with client challenges that I know nothing about, like how do we get active traders to, you know, use the right platform? I'm like, I don't know. What?
What a fascinating question.
How would I know? I mean, I wouldn't know, but I can find out. I know how to find out. And I can find out by the method of talking to the right people and putting the right pieces together so that I can do it. And look, you know, I've done it in 3 weeks. I've done it in 12 weeks. You do what you can, and that's why breaking methods can be really, really important. You know, do what you can do to give your client the useful answer.
Now I got a funny question on the platform. So people are asking me, how can we nudge folks to ask more questions using the platform? But that's something else. What? Oh my God, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep up with the user experience here. What do you say to stakeholders that say, I see the research, but the users don't get it?
Yeah, I mean, I've always said, and this is actually a phrase, is like, when the question is like, users need more information, the answer is like, literally never give them more information. There's something about the information, the way that it's presented, that is not working. And if users don't get it, you haven't done your job.
But let me, still, there's like Steve Jobs being famous for saying, well, you know, I'm going to invent and I'm going to tell the user what they want. Like, at the same, so there's...
Did he though? Like... Yes, he did in a sense, but like there was also some, it wouldn't have worked if it wasn't actually what the users want. Like you can get lucky. But I don't know. I think that you have to understand the users and you have to go in there and you have to live with them and you have to try and understand from multiple perspectives.
The Omer's cars, like is there a danger that if you ask too much, you're going to get...
Well, actually, I mean, look, you know, there's a classic story about the horsey, horseless carriage, right? Which is like when they wanted to put cars on the streets, people were really uncomfortable with them. And so what they did was they actually put a horse's head on the front of the cars to make people and horses comfortable with having them on the road. So sometimes when you make change, you've got to make smaller incremental changes to be able to enable people to adopt it. And that one worked really well. So.
And there's even some, I guess, behavioral phenomena going on with the early adopters and the influencers and the connectors and the like.
Absolutely.
Maybe one last question. We asked that to Mina about, okay, you've convinced us, you know, you were brilliant. How can we convince our clients to spend time and money and energy into behavioral economics and the like?
You know, it's a good question. Look, when I got to Deloitte, I'll be honest with you, there wasn't a lot of behavioral insights work being done, and certainly the partners weren't selling it. And I knew that that's the work that I wanted to do, so I can only tell a personal story that, you know, I just did it. I just looked at the SOW, I knew what was supposed to be delivered, and I just said...
You were one of those.
I just added on to it. I just said, look, here, I'm going to show you. You know, I'm going to show you a little bit about what this is. And I find, too, when you explain this to people, it's just so intuitive. It just makes so much sense that you really find people getting excited by it and wanting to learn more about it because they see themselves in it and they see the effectiveness. So
have you actually seen, like, designers that do bring and propose designs based on best practices of user experience design and best practices of behavioral economics and make a splendid integration of both?
Look, that's the ideal, right? Like that would be a dream situation. I think that UX designers like marketers have been using a lot of this stuff intuitively for a very, very long time. This has always been part of the work of UX designers. It's always been part of the work of marketing designers. Has it been necessarily a formal part or something that's been taught or spoken of in this way? Probably not. But I think that, and again, you know, back to Mina's comment that not everybody can be everything. You know, you have to have the researchers who do one thing and are able to speak in a way that the UX designers understand and can use. So I think that the more people understand about different things, but also knowing what you can do and knowing when you should depend on your sisters.
Depend on your sisters?
Well, if we go back to the three sisters at the beginning.
Oh, those 3 sisters, yeah. Yeah, the little agricultural part of you.
Boom, I brought it back.
Jennifer, Nachshen, mesdames et messieurs, on l'applaudit bien fort. Bravo!